Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO Jay Feitlinger and no-nonsense COO Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. All right, well, hello and welcome everybody to this next episode of the Revenue Rewired podcast. Hello, Jay.
How's it going there, Miss Sarah?
Good. I hear you're roasting and you've already had enough of the heat, and it's not even technically summer yet.
Yeah, I'm done. I don't know how people do this. I've been here since 92, and I just every summer I complain. I don't know why I'm surprised, but we're gonna head up to Flagstaff, Arizona next week and get out of this heat. We'll be down to hopefully under 100 when we go up there. I love that. I don't know.
I
It's
know. I think people
craziness.
forget like Arizona has some really nice places up north, and you remember on the holiday weekends, which I have to avoid like the plague. Actually, I don't know if you remember if I told you this, but one year, I think it was Labor Day, I read your entire Family 2.0 book in my car because traffic was that bad.
How are you reading when you're in a car?
We were going nowhere.
That's super scary. Thank you, though.
I know.
Wow.
All right. Well, as we look in the rear view mirror, see what I did right there. We
Oh,
want to
you're
talk
you're
about, I
good.
know, I know. We want to talk about why the most important days were the last 90. And it's, June. And so I think June creeps up on a lot of people in a lot of ways. It's like all of a sudden your kids are out of school and your sort of patterns are completely destroyed. And it's kind of like vacation season and it's warm and it's light out earlier and light out later. And it just feels like it feels kind of like being in a different world, just like the way our seasons work. And it's no different in business. There's, a lot of companies use a financial or fiscal calendar instead of a calendar. And so they're kind of like looking at their brand new year up ahead. And one of the things that we've talked about is as an EOS run company, you've heard about rocks and the timeline of those is a 90-day kind of like sprint. And there's a very psychological reason for that, where if you watch how it happens, it's amazing watching it get drawn out by your implementer. It's like motivation is high. And so you start at the top of the grid. And then all of a sudden, after about 30, 60 days, it just completely takes a cliff. And that is just human behavior, human psychology, and motivation. And so there's a reason why it's a 90-day sprint. And it kind of feels natural, like in sync with the seasons. And so there's, easily set a debate on what's more important, the next 90 days, which everyone's kind of planning for. And if you're an operator or a CEO, I think that's just naturally what you're inclined to look at is the next week, the next day, the next 90 days. But if you really want to hear us out, we're going to make a case that it's actually the last 90 days. And so, Jay, I know you have a client story that you could share.
Sure. Obviously, I won't mention the client name because I think he'd be annoyed at me. I maybe not. He think he'd be cool about it. But high level, and this is not just this client. I've had this chat with so many business owners, and it's also not just small businesses or large businesses. I've had this chat with CEOs of a $5 million firm and a $42 million firm, and I just feel like there's a very consistent pattern. And I do notice that the larger the company is and the more layers between like the owner or the C-suite and the actual people doing the sales and marketing, that's where I have noticed the gap to be a little bigger. But more often than not, the story essentially is I met with one of the owners of our clients, gosh, probably in early December, as he was going into 2026 planning. And the conversation was a bit more negative than I would have expected because he actually was beyond killing it for his 2025 goals. And he was just really frustrated. And so, unpacking that a bit, what it turned into was the last 3 quarters in a row. They would, a few weeks before the quarter would start, he would meet with his various different team members. They would come up with their forecasting for the next quarter. They all would agree that these numbers seem, a mini stretch, but very, very realistic and doable. And then every quarter, they consistently were so far from those goals. Now, the good news is they were way above, their expenses, and so net income was hitting, close to their forecasted goals or percentages, but the actual number of the revenue that they wanted to bring in was significantly off. And the chat very quickly turned into what I would call finger pointing, blaming people on either not being more proactive and not holding themselves accountable and not, raising the alarm earlier on that they're not going to hit the numbers and almost like they're being too lazy kind of stuff between marketing and sales and customer service. Um, and so without being rude, I pushed back and had this conversation of, is it their fault or your fault? And I basically told him a personal story that I've been very guilty of this myself, not only in StringCan, my current company, but also my past businesses, where I think typical visionary CEOs and founders are rose-colored glasses. Everything is, beyond half full, and everything is doable. But when you're relying on other people who might not have the same level of drive or understanding of the financials, maybe there's usually hiccups here and there. And so, my whole conversation with him is like, look, before you, keep on doing the craziness of every quarter following the exact same process, instead of blaming your team members, why don't we look at the process? Because it's very likely that the issue you're having 2.5 weeks before the quarter is over is not fully your team's fault. It might be on the process you guys used to come up with the actual numbers, which is why, Sarah, I'm loving, this idea about, what happened 90 days ago is likely more important than what's happening during these 90 days. Because if you're setting expectations that are not realistic, I think it's a little crazy. And for example, on a personal story, this was really funny. We were in Sicily, this over Christmas break with my family. And it was really funny. For some reason, Google Maps had us driving in the water, off the coast. And my team was just laughing about, not my team, my family, sorry. Whoops. My family was laughing about that because it's like, my gosh, like Google literally has us miles into the water driving. Obviously, that was kind of a weird glitch. But I was thinking about that this morning when we were doing our prep right before this call, is that, if you don't have the right destination in mind, it's going to feel like you're driving through water. And that is what I think is a huge miss, is you're setting yourself up to fail if you don't have the right process and models and accountability in place before the quarter even starts.
hmm and I think it's really hard for a lot of businesses to just take a step back because it feels like a step backwards in a lot of ways. Like, well, let's just fix it and move forward. And, we've even been guilty of that where it sometimes feels like, okay, let's do a retro on this project. And it's like, ugh, but it was so long ago,
I love
or
it. Yeah.
so much changed. And I think that's kind of the point, is because it's similar to what we've presented in terms of learning from your, A/B tests, for example, is until you take some space and then you go back and learn from it, you can't make changes for the future because you're just kind of going to repeat the same garbage that you did last quarter. And I think that's fine. Like we all do that with performance reviews, So why don't we do that with businesses instead of just individuals?
I love that, Sarah. I think, what's interesting is another reason why I'm so grateful for our relationship is that I think it is really hard for some people, the way their brains are wired, to be thinking about what you just said to be obvious, because it does sound obvious. But when I think about like me and you, it's like I can obviously be chameleon where you need me to be. But like my brain is always thinking about like the GPS and where I'm going. I'm always looking out the front mirror or the front window, and I'm never looking behind me. So shocking that I haven't been hit 12 million times behind. But you do a really good job at looking in that rear view mirror. And so I think, again, here, this is another reason why with when I spoke with that owner, when I asked him about his process, he was working in like his weird like a vacuum. Like he would meet alone with the director of sales and he'd meet alone with the director of marketing. There was no like COO operational realistic, feet on the ground, planted type of person involved in those conversations. And so, typical owner, they're like, "Ooh, you think you can do another $1.6 million this quarter versus last quarter? That's great. Let's go for it. Yay." But I think you have done a really good job, and probably why we've done a great job at our company the last few years on more often than not hitting our goals or getting close to it between not only revenue but especially on the profit side is you're constantly looking at the reflection part and think about what's worked and what's not. And of course, just because in the past it didn't work doesn't mean it can't work in the future. But if you don't change something, why should you expect it to be better in the next quarter? So I think for me, it's kind of nice where I'm always thinking like more like visionary and like everything is possible and we can solve world hunger. And I think you do a really good job at kind of like, getting me out of the clouds and putting my feet planted about what is real or not. So I think in between like a hybrid of what I think is doable versus a goal versus you, we usually end up in a really sweet spot where it still feels a little scary to you. It feels to me like we're being a little conservative, and more often than not, you're right. And we usually hit exactly what you're predicting, which I hate sometimes. But, I think there when you're talking about that, the analogy of this car thing that we keep bringing up organically in this conversation, that's a big aha for me where I do feel like the C-suite needs to have a very kind of a COO minded person involved in this process that can be doing reflection because again, a typical visionary CEO is not thinking about the past.
Hmm. Well, and I think you have different skill sets, and so that's where we could harken back to like episode 7 where we talked about our relationship being so different is I think it's very hard to do both. That's asking a lot of a person. Can I look backwards and look forwards? And even when you're in a car, you're not doing both at the same time. Like you might think you are, but it's like picture in picture. It's something is
Hmm.
smaller or less like in focus. And it's the same thing for a business owner. Like you have so much on your plate, trying to look backwards feels like probably a waste of time. And I'm not judging anyone that would feel this way because there's a lot of things in our lives where we might feel that way. Like, I'm not going to look back at my 20s because what was the point of that? Like, that's so far gone. What could I learn from that? And I think there's always a nugget, there's always something because even though it feels like the past, it's still close enough that it's still the present moment. You're probably still experiencing these things. And by just pausing, it's like delegating all these things that feel like they take time away from the activities or forward progress, have an exponential payoff down the road. But until you take the time and actually execute on like a look back or a retro, or even just an honest conversation about what happened in the last 90 days, you're missing out on a lot of perspectives and problems that are just going to keep resurfacing and causing you a lot of like gunk in your revenue pipe, you know?
So Sarah, I think maybe to kind of wrap this up, why don't we maybe share some thoughts regarding some things that we've done that we have found have worked well, not only for us, but our clients. And I could start and give a couple quick thoughts. And I'd love to have you maybe, share things from your point of view, and we can kind of wrap up on that note. But the way my brain has worked not only for StringCan but also for our clients is because I have been trained due to some misses on the quarterly goals to have some reflection in mind. And so often, like that story I shared earlier about the owner of that company that I met with last year to kind of talk about his 2026 planning. In that conversation, we did kind of unpack some of the friction slash excuses he was hearing regarding why they weren't hitting their goals. And so, is not using an EOS model, but I kind of walked him through how the whole EOS model could work. And that was a big part of the Q1 2026 goals for him that I have found out turned out to be very effective. But Q1 was all about improving the foundation and addressing the things that they learned from the prior couple quarters when they missed their goals of what they need to work on in Q1 as an organization, so they don't keep having that same problem going on because they're building a house of cards on a broken foundation. So I think there is some value on that kind of reflection of like if you assume that the problems you've had consistently quarter over quarter are just going to organically solve themselves, I think you're being foolish. And so for us, I think we've done a really good job at doing some of the reflection. And then, some of these things are pretty big initiatives, so they're more than one quarter. So kind of breaking it down and focusing on, okay, what can realistically be accomplished based upon our capacity, financial skill set, et cetera, that can be done in the next quarter to help us have an even better quarter the next quarter after that. So that was the first thing. The second big thing is looking at each of the kind of clients you're servicing and looking at, not only leaks or revenue leaks that they have in their own businesses, but also what's going on in their industry and uncovering new opportunities. I think what's unique about StringCan since we launched, 16 years ago is we'd never consider ourselves like a sales team selling stuff to our clients. We are more like growth advisors. And so we've done a really good job at presenting to our clients, hey, here are some things we're seeing with your business, your competitors, your industry, and where we're seeing some leaks in your revenue process that's basically costing you missed opportunities. Here are some ways that you could solve it yourselves, and here's how we can offer you help. And because of that advice, clients are like, oh, that makes total sense. Love it. They find the budget for it, and then that turns into opportunity for us to help them. And obviously, then we grow along with them. And so, a lot of the ideas that we come up with when we look at our business, which is basically coming up with like three models, we have the contractual revenue that we know is confirmed and signed off on, so we can count on that. Um, then we have kind of like client growth, where we're coming up with ideas, and that's basically the things that we think are realistic that our clients could benefit from us helping them. And then we have obviously new clients. And so when we come up with our quarterly goals, those are the three, factors that we look at to come up with our numbers. And then we typically add some kind of stretch that we think again is realistic based upon investments we want to make in the company regarding events or hiring or bonuses or whatever the situation might be. So that way the financials can afford all the investment inside of the company. And so those are the two big things. Again, removing friction and setting those as the rocks, and then the process we use to come up with our numbers. Those are the kind of how I think about stuff when it comes to planning for the next 90 days. But Sarah, I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts to kind of wrap up this show regarding any concepts around either the 90 days ago idea or how to help people that are in going into Q3 planning, things that they should be thinking about that you've learned over the time for ourselves or our clients?
Well, I will add, you forgot a fourth number, which
Oh
is
gosh.
expenses.
Oh, well, I don't care about that.
But I mean, like for me, just because you can spend it doesn't mean you should. So for
I
me, I
love
always like
that.
optimize. To me, as Scott would have said, everybody has to have a number. And for me, P&L management is my number, but I can't necessarily control what clients will say yes or no to. But I can control expenses and cash flow. And so arguably cash flow is the most important number in a company. So I'm just going to say you forgot a number. But
Well, but okay, that was a great example of the value of me and you. Like that was not scripted. So everyone just got to witness exactly how me and you operate, where again, I didn't even cross my mind, which is so scary, that I was thinking all about growth and revenue and the big stuff. And you're right, 100%. And I love that about you, where without the cash flow and the profit, cash flow is king, or queen or whatever you want to say there, is it's just so critical. Without like, who cares about the top number? You're right. It's like without profit, there's no benefit.
yeah, and then for the retro piece, I think from an operations perspective, it's kind of like what we talked about a couple episodes ago with your sales team. Like if you're going to ask someone to do something, and to them, it's also going to feel like your team is also going to feel like, oh, why am I looking back? Like either I made a mistake or it was a rough project or I'm just glad it's over. You kind of have to force, like, can we have a therapy session where maybe you make it a document or a template or something A template is highly recommended because then it becomes consistent in your output. But you're saying, can you just get everything off your chest? Now, what were the best things about this project? What were the things then that we could make better or faster? What were the things you felt like were really slow? Map that to the numbers. Like, were we over our estimate? Like, look at now how you scoped the project, which I think is also a massive gap in terms of like helping companies grow revenue is without the retro, you're just scoping off of your last best guess instead of facts. And I think that's something I bring to the table specifically for you is okay, I want to make a decision off the facts. Can you go pull all that together? And then we kind of blend like gut with facts, which makes a better, albeit still not perfect number, but that's my only additional add-on is because I don't want to add more work to people's plates. It's already painful enough to do a retro.
Hmm.
But if you make it a template, give people space to say their piece so that you can make it easier next time and then learn how to scope it better. Like ultimately, that's the outcome is how can we scope this better and make it easier?
Love it. Let's wrap this up then. That was great.
Okay, well, I hope you all aren't melting out there and Jay, enjoy Flag. But yeah, have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.